1950s. So quite a proportion of water that normally would have flown into the Fraser River is now diverted directly into the Pacific Ocean, a real engineering marvel, quite frankly. But the chain of lakes have now, in effect, a large island in the middle. That's a part of a very large park, and Tweedsmuir Park is the center of where this enormous epidemic of pine beetles started. I'm going to flip through a few slides to show you the progression over a period of years. This is now 2002, this is 2003, 2004, 2006. Look at the extent to which the forest has been overrun by pine beetle. I'm just going to go back and just illustrate this again to you. This is a phenomenal spread of a tiny beetle that can't fly very well. You remember the wings? This thing is not capable of very much sustained flight. So, one of the topics I'll come back to in a minute is what's causing this incredible dispersal. I should also point out to you that the distribution of this beetle is constrained by the distribution of its host species, lodgepole pine. In the areas that you see on the left side of that, where it's white, there are very few pines there. It's the coast range of mountains. And in the area immediately to the right, to the northeast of that region, that's where the Rocky Mountains are. So in those mountainous areas, the pines are not quite as, well, there are very few pines. Other species dominate there. So the beetle is, in fact, concentrated in the areas where there is pine. And this figure shows the area, all the green here shows pine distribution, lodgepole pine in British Columbia. And this also shows the cumulative percentage of pine that has been killed by mountain pine beetle. No other cause, only pine beetle. This slide was in 1999, and again you can see the focus of that Tweedsmuir Park, the red blob there in the middle of Tweedsmuir Park. But what's also important to notice is there are a lot of other little red spots. Pine beetle has been endemic in lodgepole pine forests on the west forever, for as long as we know. As long as there have been lodgepole pine, there have been pine beetles as far as we know. It's a naturally occurring forest pest, much as we have lots of naturally occurring forest pests in this area. Look what happens, though, in this particular context, this particular beetle with this particular host tree. This is 2000. Look at the cumulative kill, it's increasing. This is 02, 06, and now we're going into projections. 2010, 2014. I should actually go back. You can see here that the green has been replaced largely by gray. What that tells us is that by 2014, roughly 80% of all the pine, lodgepole pine in the province will have been killed by this beetle. Just think of that. Unbelievable. Let's take some lessons from this and see what we can learn at a very high level, very generalized level. The first is this, that you have to ask yourself the question, why did this occur? Why has this beetle suddenly just burst beyond all of the constraints that normally kept it in check locally, place to place to place? Why has that happened? And the answer is it's ecological release, so-called. The simple answer is that with climate change, the winters in that region are no longer cold. This beetle is constrained in its survival by extended periods of -30 weather, which used to be quite common in that area. 10 days or more of sustained -30, -35 weather. That just doesn't occur anymore. And what is occurring now is that -30 for a day is a rare event in central and northern BC. So climate change has really had an impact, and climate change in central and northern BC is projected. If you think of a transect from Vancouver, if you're thinking of it that way, from Vancouver in the southwest to the very northeast corner of the province, the greatest impacts will be in that northeast region, furthest from the ocean. That's where you'll see the greatest impacts of climate change. The areas closest to the ocean and the coast are more buffered because of the effect of the ocean. So, warmer winters, progressively, ever warmer winters, have enabled this beetle simply to be released from the normal ecological constraints that it had been living under. Climate change is the driver for that, virtually no question. There's an important point here, though, and that is that short generation organisms, beetles, can have multiple generations in 1 year. They certainly have a single generation, even under bad conditions, in 1 year. And they can evolve very rapidly. They can evolve, they have a turnover of generations, genetic reorganization every time there's a new reproductive episode. And they can evolve and adapt extraordinarily quickly relative to their host tree. A lodgepole pine tree, it takes at least 60 years in that region to mature, to be setting seed. 60 years relative to less than 1 year of generation time. In other words, these beetles can evolve at least 60 times faster, if you want to put it in very simplistic terms, than the trees can. So, the beetles can evolve quickly, they can adapt, they can modify, they can have genetic rearrangement at a very much greater rate than the host trees. The pests then can evolve rapidly, and we've actually seen that in the case of mountain pine beetle. Normally, mountain pine beetle would attack trees 30 years and older, where there is cracking in the bark and so on, that they can invade underneath the bark and establish themselves. We've now seen situations where trees as young as 12 years old with basal diameters, just that size, small trees, maybe 10 feet tall, are being killed by these beetles. The beetle is very much evolving. We're also very concerned, and I'll show more about this in a moment, that the beetle is potentially now able to jump to a new host species, jack pine, which is very closely related to lodgepole pine. And that has implications I'll talk about in just a moment. The other factors that are important here, one is monoculture. And monoculture implies that somebody designed a system where only one species was going to be present. Well, that's not quite true in central and northern BC. Lodgepole pines were very extensive throughout the region, living there naturally, growing naturally. However, with forestry practices, clear-cutting practices, a lot of silviculture practice has been taken. In other words, tree planting. I don't know how many of you in your younger days went tree planting in BC, but lots of students still do that. There's one at least. You can make a heck of a lot of money if you're good at it, planting trees, and virtually all of those trees that are planted are genetically quite uniform and single species. So, what have we been doing? We've been actually taking more diverse forests and creating less diverse forests through silvicultural practices. Why would we do that? Well, because it's much more economical to harvest even age trees 60, 70 years from now. They're all even age, even size, so that you can design mills specifically for that size, that species of pine. In the forest sector, in the economies of forestry companies are very much dominated by reducing costs. So if you have primary feedstock coming into a mill that's all of a uniform size, uniform species composition, you can set up your mills to be very, very, very efficient at milling that raw material into finished product.